Morning, guys. This is Mildly Interested Part 2, Chapter 1. Trey, Jada and Pierce arrived at JFK, hesitant about taking a plane to India. Jada had recently read that Delhi was the rape capital of the world. Trey was in suspended awe at even the thought of travelling to another country, let alone India, to see his sister. Pierce had picked up a book at one of the airport bookstores he'd heard about. The way he understood it from what a friend had told him and reading the blurb was that a couple go to New Delhi, India and search for some scriptures, or something along those lines, written 5,000 years ago on palm leaves. One of them is skeptic, the other a believer, and what they find out about themselves blows their minds. Something like that, he thought. At least the plane trip would go faster, even if it was crap. They sat on plastic bucket seats, Trey still resting his head on Jada's shoulder. Pierce read his book, sitting opposite them, now and again his eyes bulging with surprise. "Hey, Jada," Pierce motioned. "Yep," Jada replied, craning her head forward. "Do you know Delhi very well?" "Not at all, never been there. Why?" "It's just that you booked the hotel, so I thought..." "Never mind," Pierce returned to his book. The flight to Delhi was called 20 minutes later. As they lined up to board, Pierce had forgotten about being nervous. Jada had sensed an eagerness in him and even a slight change. He was almost smiling, clutching the open book in his hand as they passed through the gates and along the tunnel toward the plane. The 15 or so hours on the plane was comfortable, with a short stopover at Dubai where the plane's empty seats were filled with more Indians. Pierce noticed that they seemed to be working class. He turned toward Jada. "Hey, you think that they work in Dubai, but commute from India?" Pierce asked, motioning towards the Indians filing in onto the plane and into their seats. Mostly they had a tired look about them, occasionally even content. But one thing he noticed was that they seemed to be proud and melancholic. "Maybe there's a lot of construction still going on in Dubai," she replied. Trey was trying to listen with his eyes closed, just in case they said something cool. He opened one eye slightly to see the Indians that Pierce was talking about. As the plane headed across the subcontinent towards New Delhi, it began to bounce side to side. Over the loudspeaker, the captain requested that people take their seats and buckle up. A ding sounded in conjunction with a light above the seats, urging people to buckle up. Pierce whispered into Trey's ear that they were probably going to crash, so he better open his eyes to see the last bit of the world he could before they hit the side of the mountain and smashed into a billion pieces. Trey bounced to attention, wiping his eyes and looking toward Jada with some concern. "It's okay, just turbulence. Hopefully it'll stop soon," Jada assured him, although as she was saying it, she felt a little queasy and a little bit like she was lying. "But Pierce said we're going to crash." Jada pulled forward, looking over to Pierce, who was now laughing. She gave him a dirty look and shook her head. "Ha ha," Pierce laughed. "You suck," Trey countered, putting his head on Jada's shoulder. The turbulence had lasted longer than any of them imagined. Trey was thinking that Pierce might be right. Jada tried to keep her cool for Trey's sake, and Pierce held his stomach, the gin and tonic not conducive to extreme turbulence. When it abated, the captain announced that everything was okay, that the rest of the way was going to be fine weather. As the plane moved into Delhi airspace and circled the airport awaiting its turn to land, Jada gathered herself and continued to coddle Trey. Pierce headed to the toilet, thinking that the toilets in India might not be that great, so if he went now, maybe he could hold it for a few weeks. When he returned from the toilet, he noticed a stewardess from the front section of the plane. "Huh, is that first class?" he thought. He moved closer to the curtain and peeked through. "Damn it, that looks good." "She is beautiful, isn't she?" said a man, turning from one of the super comfy looking seats of first class. "Oh yes, but I meant the cabin space," Pierce replied. "Me too," he replied, smiling and turning to face forward. Pierce closed the curtain and walked back to his seat. He noticed that the stewardess of kettle class weren't quite as beautiful, and he wondered if it was a coincidence. When the plane landed, there was a mad rush to get out. The Indians knew that they were what they were doing, gathering their bags and belongings before they were even told they could take their seatbelts off. Trey, Pierce and Jada looked on with confusion. "Don't worry, Trey, they're just being impatient. It's more polite to wait, and we're not in a hurry anyway," Jada said to Trey. They lined up last after all the passengers or for all the other passengers. Pierce could only see a few Indians. He'd been enjoying the book about the palm leaves and was excited to get out of the plane. He was also reaching for a cigarette. He had begun to get hypersensitivity to the smell of the cigarettes from the Indian men on the plane. It was leaching from their jackets. He even followed one guy up and down the plane in his trail. Exiting the plane and finding their baggage was fairly straightforward. The airport was fairly basic as far as they could see. "What's the local time, Jada?" Pierce asked. I changed it on the plane. It's 10 a.m. "Okay, so guess we have to get a taxi. I've been reading about taxis here and I think we should get a prepaid," Pierce said, a little concerned. "That sounds like a great idea, but how do we do that?" "Who knows? Let's see what we can find. A bit of an adventure, this." Trey followed what they were saying but wasn't really taking any notice. He'd been counting turbans since he got off the plane. "Why do they wear those turban things?" Trey asked. "Fashion," Pierce answered with a smirk. "No, it's not, I think," Trey replied. "No, it's part of their religion, Trey. They're Sikh." Jada smiled. Trey wondered what it meant, part of their religion. He'd have to look into that, he thought. Pierce went to a box over to one side, reading the word taxi on it, and wondered if that was it. He went to the window. "Hi." "Good morning, sir," replied one of the Indians in the booth. There were 4 of them in a space big enough for 2 at most. "How do I get a prepaid taxi?" he asked hesitantly. "No problem. Which area are you going?" the warrior man asked, his teeth crooked, his words coming out of his mouth as if they'd been said 1,000,000 times. "Not sure. Wait, let me see." Pierce scrummaged through his pockets and pulled out a piece of paper and read it to him slowly. "Okay," he said, shaking his head side to side. "Let me see," grabbing the paper from his hand. He hardly looked at it, mentioned to another by his side something in Hindi, and then with a stroke of a pen he'd written down on a small piece of paper the size of a dry cleaning docket the address and the cost. 138 rupees. "Okay, great. Thank you, sir," Pierce responded, holding the piece of paper. As he turned around to go back to the others, he snapped back, not realizing they were behind him, listening to what was happening. "Got it," Pierce exclaimed, with the paper in his hand. "Should be easy now." Chapter 2. With his bags in tow and the prepaid ticket, they followed the signs of the main exit. The glass doors revealed a gathering of people outside. As they got closer, the doors opened automatically, and the noise from the people exploded into the less chaotic terminal. They stopped just past the doors. People of all different sizes, colours and religions were hanging over a wooden railing, bunched up as if they were prevented from coming any further. Some of them were shouting, others looked on eager to touch the foreigners as if they were gods to be idolised. Others held signs with strange names. The immediate confrontation of the wall of people was blinding. Pierce smiled and shook his head in disbelief. Jada stood with her mouth agape, squeezing Trey's hand with fear. Trey felt like he was in heaven with the amount of things and people he could count. "Oh my God, I've never seen this many people in my life, and I live in Manhattan," Jada claimed. "Yeah, it's cool, huh? I didn't imagine this." "Well, I don't think someone could," Pierce replied, not taking his eyes off the humming crowd. Trey had counted 38 turbans already in a matter of minutes. As they stood gawking, of which is probably the worst thing that one could do in India, a man a little taller than Trey, but shorter than Jada, pushed through a separate line where taxi drivers stood. He didn't wear a uniform, just a cap, jacket and shirt tucked into a well-tightened belt, the tongue hanging loose. Without hesitating at all, he approached Pierce, standing right in front of him, looked him in the eyes and said, "I'm a taxi. This is my number and credentials," flicking out a piece of paper. Pierce grabbed the paper and inspected it. It didn't look too official, but it did say taxi driver. Pierce hesitated for a second as he recalled reading that you shouldn't go with anyone that isn't in the taxi queue. He looked over the short driver to others, still standing patient behind a barrier. "Don't worry, I'm a driver. I have a taxi over there," he said, motioning to the rear of the crowd. "Give me your prepaid ticket." Pierce looked at Jada. She shrugged her shoulders, not knowing any different. Pierce, still not convinced and quite taken by surprise, gave the man his ticket. The scrubby man, who had obviously brushed himself off, snatched it, looked at the amount, and then asked them where they wanted to go. "It says on the ticket," Pierce answered, not wanting to sound like he didn't know where he was going. "Yes, but where?" he answered. Pierce then had to get the paper from his pocket and read to him. "Okay, I know where this is. We must go," he said, grabbing a bag, turning toward the crowd. Feeling swept off their feet, they grabbed the other bags and went after the driver. Pierce was very hesitant now and feeling a little hoodwinked all the while, trying to look past the hurrying driver to where he was going. He noticed that many of the other taxi drivers in the queue were looking at them. He couldn't work out if it was because he had gotten the business, because they were non-Indians, or because they knew something about the driver that they were yet to find out. The driver kept walking, dragging his bag without much care, occasionally looking back to make sure they were following. As the crowd began to thin out, they found themselves in a car park area where all manner of cars parked in every bit of space they could find. It was a white car, smallish, with a taxi sign on the roof, but it didn't have any official markings. "Are you an official taxi?" Pierce asked the wrong question. "Yes, of course. Look," the driver pointed to the taxi sign on top. "But you don't have those stickers like the other taxi, and we were told to not take a taxi that wasn't official." "This is my paper." He pulled out another piece, equally shoddy looking, but with a similar notation to the other taxis. Pierce and Jada both scrutinised it, but couldn't tell if it was fake or not. "You can go back to the line if you like," he bluffed, obviously not wanting them to leave. "What do you think, Jada?" asked Pierce, turning toward Jada, giving him his back. "I guess we're here now, so might as well." "Okay, let's go." Pierce made an executive decision, hoping he wouldn't regret it later. The car was old and beaten up, but it sped along the dusty streets full of potholes and untouchables. It seemed to take forever to get past the initial messy airport and its hinterland. All the streets looked the same. Cars, cows, tuk-tuks, beggars, vendors, and police zigzagged past the car as it bumped from one crowd to another. Pierce was beginning to feel a little concerned, although the driver looked like he knew where he was going, taking left turns down narrowing streets, some dark, others packed. His suspicion of the driver always looking in the rear vision mirror at them, and with one eye on the other, and the other on his phone, was nerve-wracking. What I was on the road, he thought. He was from New York, and not trusting cabbies was a way of life. The taxi turned into an area that looked like some sort of forum. It was quiet, the streets weren't paved, and in the middle stood a lone tree. He pulled up next to one of the buildings and turned the engine off. Pierce didn't want to ask if they had arrived, because that would have proved that he hadn't been to Delhi before. "What are we doing?" Pierce asked firmly. "I'll just be a minute," the driver said, trailing off, climbing the stairs and entering some dirty glass doors. "What's this place?" Jed asked. "Not sure," Pierce answered as he craned his head looking above the door at some writing on the building. They waited to see what was happening, but after about 5 minutes, things in the taxi were getting a bit spooky. Trey, whom was sitting in the middle, was being patient as usual, didn't say a word. "Do you think we should find out what's going on?" Jada asked, getting a little concerned. "Yep, it's time to do something," Pierce said as he opened the door, turned back and asked them to be careful and don't open the door for anyone, especially an Indian. Pierce ran up the stairs, feeling nerves that you'd usually get at a sports carnival just before your 100-metre dash heat. When he took the last step, he entered an office. The glass door was in between two glass windows. He couldn't see anyone in the room. What looked like a receptionist desk wasn't manned. An old leather-look sofa sat on its left against the wall. Pierce kept walking through the office, letting the door close behind him. Where the fuck has this douchebag gone, he thought. At the rear of that room was another glass partitioned wall on which he could see the driver and two other Indian men. One was behind a desk, the other standing next to the driver. The one behind the desk was on the phone when they saw Pierce coming. Okay, I'll leave it there and we'll continue next week. Thanks guys, ciao.